At 23:20 hours on October 26, 1943, Elyesa Bazna unlocked the study door of the British ambassador's residence in Ankara, Turkey, using a key he had duplicated 3 weeks earlier. The residence was quiet. Ambassador Sir Hugh Knatchbull Hugeson had retired to his bedroom an hour earlier. The household staff had finished their duties and withdrawn to their quarters. Bazna was alone in the darkened hallway outside the ambassador's private study. He carried a Leica camera concealed in his jacket pocket. The camera was loaded with 36 exposure films specifically designed for document photography. He had purchased the camera and film 2 weeks earlier at a shop in Ankara's commercial district, paying in cash, giving a false name ensuring no connection to his employment at the embassy. The study contained a large desk, bookshelves, leather chairs, and a safe. The safe was a Chubb model manufactured in Britain, approximately 3 feet tall, painted dark green, positioned against the wall behind the desk. The safe contained the ambassador's most sensitive correspondence, diplomatic cables, from London intelligence summaries and documents marked Most Secret and Ultra. Bazna knew the safe's location because he had observed the ambassador opening it during his duties as personal valet. He knew the combination because he had watched the ambassador's fingers as he turned the dial, memorizing the sequence. Right, 32 left, 18 right, 44. He had tested the combination 2 days earlier when the ambassador was attending a diplomatic function. The safe had opened smoothly. Bazna had closed it without removing anything, confirming the combination worked, establishing his operational procedure. Tonight he would photograph documents. He would remove files from the safe photograph. Each page return the files to their exact positions, close the safe, and lock the study door. The entire operation would take approximately 45 minutes. If the ambassador woke and came downstairs, Bazna would claim he heard a noise and was investigating. The camera would remain concealed. The safe would be locked. No evidence would exist that anything had been disturbed. He opened the safe. The interior was organized with files stacked vertically, each labeled with classification markings. Bazna selected a file marked Most Secret D-Day Planning Documents. The file contained 12 pages of typed text, single-spaced, densely written. He placed the first page on the desk, positioned his camera 18 inches above the document, and photographed it using available light from the desk lamp. The procedure was methodical. Photograph, advance film, remove photograph page, position next page, photograph, advance film. He worked through all 12 pages in 8 minutes. Then he returned the pages to their file, ensuring they were in correct order, and replaced the file in the safe exactly where it had been. He selected another file, this one labeled Most Secret Overlord. 17 pages, photographed in 11 minutes. By 0010 hours, Bazna had photographed 48 pages from 6 different files. He closed the safe, spun the dial, locked the study door, and returned to his quarters in the staff wing of the residence. The entire operation had taken 50 minutes. The ambassador had not woken. No staff member had observed him. The documents would be missed only if someone compared the current state of files to previous inventories, which was unlikely. Bazna developed the film the next morning in a makeshift darkroom in his rented apartment in Ankara. The images were clear, legible, showing classified British documents in sufficient detail that every word could be read. He had photographic evidence of Allied invasion planning, including preliminary details about an operation codenamed Overlord, proposed landing sites in France, force compositions, logistical requirements, and strategic objectives. This information was worth a fortune. Bazna estimated the Germans would pay at least $20,000 for these documents, possibly more. He would contact the German embassy in Ankara, offer to sell the intelligence, negotiate payment in British pounds, and establish himself as a regular source. The money would finance his retirement. He would work as the ambassador's valet by day, photograph documents by night, sell intelligence to Germans for cash, and within a year have sufficient funds to disappear. The plan would work perfectly for 6 months. Then it would collapse, not because British counterintelligence discovered him, but because the Germans paid him in counterfeit currency that would be worthless after the war. Elyesa Bazna was born in 1904 in Pristina, Kosovo, then part of the Ottoman Empire. His family was Albanian Muslim, relatively prosperous by regional standards. His father was a minor official in the Ottoman administrative system. Elyesa received basic education in Pristina, learning to read and write Turkish, Albanian, and some French. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I displaced the family. They moved to Ankara when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk established the Turkish Republic in 1923. Elyesa, now 19 years old, needed employment. He had no professional skills, no advanced education, no family connections that could secure government positions. His options were limited to manual labor or domestic service. He chose domestic service because it offered better wages and working conditions than labor. He worked initially as a footman in various Ankara households, learning the protocols of wealthy households, observing how diplomats and government officials lived. He was intelligent, observant, discreet. He learned that wealthy people valued servants who were invisible, present when needed, absent, otherwise never discussing household affairs with outsiders. By the late 1930s, Bazna was working as a valet for foreign diplomats in Ankara. He worked for the Yugoslav ambassador, then the German ambassador, learning the rhythms of diplomatic households, understanding when officials were home, when they worked, when they entertained, when they were vulnerable to observation. He learned that diplomats were careless with documents, often leaving classified materials on desks in briefcases in unlocked offices. In 1943, he was hired as personal valet to Sir Hugh Knatchbull Hugeson, British ambassador to Turkey. The position paid well by Turkish standards, approximately $30 per month, plus room and board. But Bazna wanted more. He had observed wealthy people for 20 years and had concluded that wealth provided freedom, security, opportunity. He wanted what they had. He was willing to steal it. The decision to spy was purely mercenary. Bazna had no ideological commitment to Germany or Britain. He had no political beliefs beyond self-interest. He simply recognized that he had access to valuable information that someone would pay for. The Germans would pay the most because they were losing the war and needed intelligence desperately. His first approach to the German embassy occurred on October 28, 1943, 2 days after photographing the documents. He presented himself at the embassy gate, stated he had information to sell, and requested meeting with intelligence officers. The guard was skeptical. Walk-in sources were usually frauds, but agreed to pass the message to Ludwig Moitzich, the SD Sicherheitsdienst representative at the embassy. Moitzich was 38 years old, a career intelligence officer who had served in various positions throughout the Balkans. He was skeptical when informed that a Turkish valet wanted to sell British documents. Walk-in sources offering sensational intelligence were usually fabrications. But SD protocols required investigating all potential sources. Moitzich agreed to meet the walk-in, expecting to dismiss him within minutes. The meeting occurred at 1800 hours on October 28 in a secure room at the German embassy. Bazna presented himself as Pierre, giving no real name. He explained that he worked at the British embassy, had access to classified documents, and could photograph them regularly for payment. As proof, he produced 2 rolls of developed film containing 48 photographs of British documents. Moitzich examined the photographs. They appeared authentic. The classification markings looked genuine. The content was consistent with British diplomatic style. But authentication required expert analysis. Moitzich told Bazna to return in 3 days while the photographs were evaluated. German intelligence analysts in Berlin confirmed the documents were authentic. The content matched information from other sources. The classification markings were correct. The language and format were consistent with British practice. This was genuine intelligence from inside the British Embassy in Ankara. Moisish received authorization to recruit the source, establish regular contact, and pay for information. The authorized payment was $20,000 per delivery, a staggering sum equal to 55 years of Bazna's salary as a valet. Moisish was authorized to pay up to $100,000 total if the source continued producing intelligence of this quality. The second meeting occurred on October 31st. Moisish informed Bazna that his intelligence was genuine and valuable, that the Germans would pay $20,000 for the first delivery and would pay similar amounts for future deliveries if quality remained high. Bazna accepted the terms. Moisish gave him the codename Cicero after the Roman orator, suggesting that the source was eloquent and persuasive. Cicero established an operational pattern. Every 5 to 7 days, he would photograph documents from the ambassador's safe. He would develop the film in his apartment, bring the photographs to dead-drop locations in Ankara, and collect payment at separate locations. The dead drops were commercial areas with high foot traffic, where Cicero could pass materials without being observed. The payment collection points were similar locations, changed frequently to prevent surveillance. Between November 1943 and April 1944, Cicero delivered approximately 400 photographs containing information on Allied strategy, British diplomatic communications, intelligence summaries, and operational planning. The information included details about Operation Overlord preliminary planning documents describing conceptual plans for invading France, Allied strategic priorities in the Mediterranean theater, British intelligence assessments of German military capabilities, diplomatic negotiations with Turkey regarding potential Turkish entry into the war, Allied relations with the Soviet Union, including disputes over post-war boundaries, British intelligence sources and methods, including signals intelligence capabilities. The intelligence was comprehensive, current, and strategic. It provided Germany with insight into Allied decision-making at the highest levels. The information should have been operationally decisive, but it was not. German intelligence recipients were skeptical. The quality was too good. The access seemed impossible. British security was supposedly excellent. How could a valet photograph documents from the ambassador's safe without being detected? The intelligence must be British deception, a sophisticated operation to feed false information to Germany. This skepticism was reinforced by parallel intelligence suggesting the same information was false. German agents in Britain reported that Allied invasion planning was focused on the Pas-de-Calais region, not Normandy. German signals intelligence indicated Allied preparations were consistent with Pas-de-Calais. The Cicero intelligence suggesting Normandy contradicted other sources and was therefore suspect. What German analysts did not know was that the Pas-de-Calais intelligence was deliberate Allied deception Operation Fortitude. The signals intelligence was false traffic created to mislead German listeners. The agent reports were from double agents controlled by British counterintelligence. The Cicero intelligence reporting Normandy was accurate, but because it contradicted the deception, it was dismissed as false. This failure demonstrates a fundamental problem in intelligence analysis. When multiple sources provide contradictory information, analysts must determine which sources are reliable. German analysts chose to believe the sources that confirmed their preconceptions that Allied invasion would target the shortest crossing point at Pas-de-Calais, and dismissed the source that contradicted those preconceptions, even though Cicero was providing genuine documents and the other sources were providing deception. The result was that Cicero's intelligence, though accurate, had minimal operational impact. German military planning continued based on assumptions that Pas-de-Calais was the invasion target. When Allied forces landed at Normandy on June 6, 1944, German commanders were surprised, despite having received accurate intelligence from Cicero 6 months earlier. But Cicero's intelligence had another consequence more significant than its operational impact. It alerted British counterintelligence that a penetration existed. British signals intelligence reading German diplomatic traffic through ultra-decrypts identified references to a source codenamed Cicero operating in Ankara. The references were fragmentary provided incomplete coverage of German communications, but sufficient to indicate a serious security breach. British Security Coordination launched an investigation in December 1943. The investigation focused on identifying who had access to the compromised documents. The suspect pool was limited to personnel with access to the ambassador's study and safe, the ambassador himself, his personal secretary, 2 diplomatic staff members, and the household staff, including Bazna. Bazna was an obvious suspect. He had access to the ambassador's study as personal valet. He had financial motives, his salary was modest, and he had no family wealth. He was Albanian, not British, suggesting possible loyalty issues. But evidence was circumstantial. No direct proof connected Bazna to the intelligence breach. The investigation made a critical error. Investigators assumed that access to the safe required knowledge of the combination, and that only the ambassador and his personal secretary knew the combination. They did not consider that someone might have observed the combination being entered and memorized it. This assumption eliminated Bazna as a suspect because he supposedly could not open the safe. As a result, the investigation focused on other suspects, particularly the personal secretary who had legitimate access to the safe. The secretary was subjected to intense scrutiny. His background investigated, his finances, examined his activities, monitored. He was innocent, but the investigation continued for months, disrupting embassy operations, creating paranoia among staff. Meanwhile, Bazna continued photographing documents. He became bolder, taking more risks, photographing more material. By March 1944, he had collected over $200,000 in payments from the Germans. The money was stored in his apartment in a locked trunk in British pound notes that he believed would be negotiable after the war. He began planning his retirement. He would resign from the embassy, claim he was returning to Kosovo to care for family, and disappear. He would move to South America, possibly Argentina or Brazil, where he could live comfortably on $200,000 for the rest of his life. The plan required only that he avoid detection for a few more months. But in April 1944, the British investigation suddenly focused on Bazna. New information from ultra-intercepts identified specific documents that had been photographed and the dates when the photographs were taken. Cross-referencing these dates with staff schedules showed that Bazna was the only person with consistent access to the study on the relevant dates. On April 20, 1944, British security officers confronted Bazna at the embassy. They accused him of espionage, described evidence against him, and demanded confession. Bazna denied everything. He claimed he had no knowledge of espionage, had never accessed the ambassador's safe, had never photographed documents. The security officers searched his quarters at the embassy, finding nothing incriminating. They could not search his private apartment without Turkish government cooperation, which they could not request without revealing the investigation's existence. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. Bazna maintained denial throughout. Without physical evidence, the camera, the film, the photographs, the security officers could not prove espionage. They could not arrest him without evidence. Turkish law required evidence for arrest, and British authorities had no jurisdiction to arrest anyone in Turkey without Turkish cooperation. The security officers had one option: dismiss Bazna from employment and monitor him afterward. If he contacted German intelligence, surveillance would observe the contact and provide evidence for Turkish authorities to arrest him. Bazna was informed that his services were no longer required, given 2 weeks severance pay, and dismissed. Bazna recognized that dismissal meant British authorities suspected him but could not prove espionage. He had 2 choices: continue spying, using different access, or retire immediately with the money he had accumulated. Continuing risked arrest. Retiring meant living on $200 sufficient for comfortable life, or He chose retirement. He resigned from the embassy on April 30, 1944, told German contacts he was ceasing operations, and withdrew to his apartment to plan departure from Turkey. He would wait until the war ended, then leave Turkey for South America, where British authorities could not extradite him. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Bazna attempted to exchange his British pound notes for other currency. Banks refused. The notes were examined and determined to be counterfeit. The Germans had paid Bazna in forged currency produced by Operation Bernhard, a German program to counterfeit British and American currency. The counterfeits were excellent quality but identifiable by experts. Banks would not accept them. Bazna's $200,000 was worthless paper. He was ruined. The money he had risked his life to acquire was fake. The comfortable retirement he had planned was impossible. He was 41 years old, unemployed, without savings, a suspected spy, unemployable in any diplomatic position. He spent the next 15 years working menial jobs in Ankara and Istanbul. He worked as a night watchman, a construction laborer, a janitor. The money he earned barely covered living expenses. He lived in poverty, bitter about the German betrayal, unable to leverage his espionage career into anything useful. In 1950, he attempted to claim compensation from the Federal Republic of Germany. He wrote letters to German officials explaining that he had spied for Germany, had been paid in counterfeit currency, and deserved compensation. The letters were ignored. West Germany had no interest in acknowledging wartime espionage operations or compensating former agents. In 1952, Bazna sold his story to American journalist Ludwig Moitzich, who published it as Operation Cicero in 1950. The book was moderately successful, earning Bazna approximately $5,000 in royalties. The money provided temporary relief but did not resolve his financial situation. In 1962, the story was adapted into a film, Five Fingers, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, starring James Mason as Cicero. The film was commercially successful, but Bazna received no compensation because he had sold rights to his story for a flat fee rather than percentage of earnings. Bazna died on December 21, 1970, in Munich, Germany, at age 66. He was living in a small apartment supported by German government welfare payments. His obituary in Turkish newspapers described him as the spy who betrayed Britain and was betrayed by Germany. The obituary noted that his espionage had accomplished nothing operationally and ruined his life personally. Post-war analysis by intelligence historians concluded that Cicero was one of the most successful intelligence penetrations of World War II in terms of access and volume of intelligence acquired. He photographed approximately 400 documents over 6 months, many classified, most secret or ultra. The intelligence he provided was accurate and current, but the penetration failed strategically, because German intelligence did not believe the intelligence and therefore did not act on it. The information about Normandy was dismissed as deception. The information about Allied strategic priorities was discounted as possibly manipulated. The source was considered too good to be true and therefore probably was not true. This failure reflected deeper problems in German intelligence analysis. German intelligence in 1943-44 was organizationally fragmented, with multiple competing agencies, Abwehr, SD, Foreign Ministry, intelligence, military intelligence, operating independently and refusing to share information. Analytical standards were poor. Sources were not properly vetted. Intelligence was politicized, with analysts tailoring assessments to confirm leadership's preconceptions rather than challenging assumptions. British counterintelligence also failed. They identified that a penetration existed but could not identify the penetrator until too late. The investigation was compromised by assumptions that eliminated the actual spy from consideration. When they finally identified Bazna, they could not arrest him without evidence or Turkish cooperation. The only party that succeeded was Allied deception operations. Operation Fortitude successfully convinced German intelligence that Pas de Calais was the invasion target. The deception was so effective that when genuine intelligence from Cicero contradicted it, German analysts dismissed the genuine intelligence as false and believed the deception as true. The Cicero case demonstrated several principles that remain relevant to counterintelligence. First, access does not guarantee impact. Cicero had extraordinary access, but his intelligence had minimal operational effect because recipients did not believe it. Second, deception can negate genuine intelligence. When deception is sufficiently comprehensive, genuine intelligence that contradicts deception appears false. Third, insider threats are difficult to detect. Bazna was not a trained spy, had no sophisticated tradecraft, operated alone, and still evaded detection for 6 months while photographing hundreds of classified documents. Fourth, security depends on assumptions. British security assumed the safe combination was secret, that access required authorized knowledge, that a valet would not have cryptographic skills. These assumptions were wrong, and the security system failed. Fifth, payment disputes can end espionage careers. Bazna might have continued spying after dismissal if the Germans had paid him in real currency. The counterfeit payment ended his career and ensured he would not spy for Germany again. The legacy of the Cicero case influenced post-war counterintelligence practices. The British Embassy in Ankara implemented new security procedures, including combination locks that changed automatically document safes, that required two-person access, and enhanced personnel security screening for all staff, including household employees. These procedures became standard across diplomatic facilities worldwide. The case also influenced how intelligence services treat walk-in sources. Cicero demonstrated that walk-in sources offering spectacular intelligence can be genuine, not deception. But evaluation requires careful analysis, corroboration from independent sources, and testing to determine whether the source is controlled by an adversary service. Modern counterintelligence training uses the Cicero case as an example of inside a threat. The case demonstrates that trusted insiders with access can exploit routine procedures to steal classified information. Prevention requires layered security, continuous monitoring, and challenging assumptions about who has access and what they can do with it. Elyesa Bazna, born 1904, died 1970. The Albanian valet who spied for Germany, who photographed 400 classified documents from the British ambassador's safe, who provided intelligence that should have changed the war's outcome but did not because recipients did not believe it. The spy who was paid $200,000 in counterfeit currency, who lived his final years in poverty, who sold his story for $5,000 and died unknown. The penetration that succeeded operationally but failed strategically because German intelligence analysts could not distinguish genuine intelligence from Allied deception. Cicero, the code name that became famous in espionage history. The valet, who photographed D-Day planning documents and whose intelligence was dismissed as too good to be true. The source, who demonstrated that access without belief, intelligence without impact, and success without reward are the recurring patterns of espionage in wartime. The spy master who was neither master nor successful, who betrayed his employer and was betrayed by his handlers, whose legacy is a lesson in how intelligence can fail despite penetrations succeeding, and how espionage careers often end not in triumph, but in poverty and obscurity.